Number 1. Expulsion of French troops from Burkina Faso. In January 2023, Captain Traoré's government demanded the withdrawal of all French military forces from Burkina Faso within 1 month. This decisive action ended years of French military presence aimed at combating jihadist insurgencies in the Sahel region. For France, this represented not merely a tactical setback but a strategic blow to its counter-terrorism architecture in West Africa. The approximately 400 French special forces stationed in Burkina Faso were part of Operation Sabre, which complemented the larger regional Operation Barkhane. Their mission focused on targeting high-value terrorist leaders from groups like Jama'at Nusrat al-Islam, Wal Muslimin, JNIM, and Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, ISGS. The French military had conducted numerous operations that they considered successful in degrading terrorist capabilities. From Macron's perspective, the expulsion appeared counterproductive to Burkina Faso's own security interests. French officials argued that their forces provided critical intelligence, training, and operational support that Burkinabe forces couldn't easily replace. Macron himself expressed frustration that what he viewed as humanitarian assistance was being rejected for political reasons. Traoré, however, framed the expulsion differently. In his public statements, he portrayed French military presence as ineffective at best and complicit at worst. He questioned why, despite years of French military operations, the security situation had deteriorated rather than improved. This narrative resonated with many Burkinabe citizens who had witnessed the expansion of terrorist control over large portions of their country despite French intervention. Number 2. Rise of anti-French sentiment. The surge in anti-French sentiment under Traoré's leadership has been remarkable both in its intensity and its public expression. Demonstrations featuring burned French flags, defaced French monuments, and slogans like "France dégage," "France get out," have become common in Ouagadougou and other cities. This sentiment didn't emerge spontaneously. Historical grievances over colonialism provided fertile ground, but Traoré's government has actively cultivated anti-French attitudes through state media, public speeches, and education initiatives. Government-controlled television and radio frequently broadcast content critical of France, highlighting historical exploitation and suggesting continued French interference in Burkina Faso's affairs. For Macron, who has attempted to acknowledge colonial wrongs while maintaining France's positive influence, this wave of hostility represents a painful rejection. He has repeatedly emphasized France's investments in development, healthcare, and education in Burkina Faso. In a 2017 speech at Ouagadougou University, Macron had promised a new era in Franco-African relations, one based on mutual respect and partnership rather than paternalism. The disconnect between Macron's vision and the reality of growing anti-French sentiment reflects deeper issues of perception and trust. Many Burkinabe citizens view French aid as a mechanism of control rather than genuine assistance, while French officials struggle to understand why their efforts are met with hostility rather than appreciation. Number 3. Burkina Faso's pivot toward Russia. Perhaps nothing has alarmed Macron's administration more than Burkina Faso's rapid and enthusiastic embrace of Russia as an alternative partner. Following the pattern established in Mali and the Central African Republic, Traoré has actively sought Russian military support, economic cooperation, and diplomatic backing. This pivot became visible in October 2022, just weeks after Traoré took power, when pro-Russian demonstrations erupted in Ouagadougou. Protesters waved Russian flags and called for Russian intervention against jihadist groups. By early 2023, Russian military advisors had begun arriving in Burkina Faso, and negotiations for more substantial cooperation were underway. For France, this development represents not just a diplomatic setback but a strategic threat. Russia's expanding influence in the Sahel challenges France's historical position and threatens to undermine Western security frameworks in the region. Macron has publicly warned about the destabilizing potential of Russian involvement, particularly through the Wagner Group, which he characterizes as a predatory force rather than a genuine security partner. Traore, however, presents Russia as a more respectful partner that doesn't impose political conditions on its assistance. In his public statements, he has praised Russia's pragmatic approach to security cooperation and its willingness to provide military equipment without lectures on governance or human rights. This framing resonates with many Burkinabe citizens who have grown skeptical of Western intentions. Number 4. Dismissal of France's counterterrorism support. The rejection of French counterterrorism assistance struck at the heart of France's security doctrine for the Sahel. Since 2013, France had positioned itself as an indispensable partner in fighting jihadist groups, investing billions of euros and sacrificing the lives of dozens of French soldiers in the process. Traoré's dismissal of this support as ineffective or counterproductive represented a profound challenge to France's narrative. In multiple speeches, he has suggested that French operations may have actually worsened the security situation by antagonizing local communities and failing to understand the complex social dynamics that fuel extremism. This criticism touches on a sensitive point for Macron, who has defended French military involvement as necessary and effective despite growing casualties and territorial losses to terrorist groups. French officials point to successful operations against high-ranking terrorist leaders and argue that without their intervention, the situation would be far worse. The fundamental disagreement about the value and impact of French counterterrorism efforts reflects deeper divisions about security approaches. France has emphasized military solutions and centralized state control, while Traoré has increasingly spoken about the need for local solutions and community engagement, though his own military approach has been criticized for heavy-handedness. Number 5. End of French diplomatic presence. The deterioration of diplomatic relations reached a critical point in January 2023, when Burkina Faso expelled the French ambassador, Luc Halad. This unprecedented move followed months of increasing restrictions on French diplomatic activities and accusations that French diplomats were interfering in Burkina Faso's internal affairs. For Macron, the expulsion represented a violation of diplomatic norms and a personal affront. France had maintained continuous diplomatic representation in Burkina Faso since independence, and the ambassador's role was seen as essential for coordinating aid, security cooperation, and protecting French citizens in the country. Traoré's government justified the expulsion by claiming that Ambassador Halad had made inappropriate comments about Burkina Faso's security situation and had met with opposition figures. These accusations reflected a broader narrative that French diplomats were working to undermine the military government rather than respecting its sovereignty. The diplomatic rupture has had practical consequences beyond symbolism. Communication. Channels between Paris and Ouagadougou have been severely restricted, making it difficult to address crises or coordinate on issues of mutual concern. French citizens in Burkina Faso have faced increasing hostility, and many have chosen to leave the country, further diminishing France's presence. Number 6. Support for Pan-African military regimes. Traoré has actively aligned himself with other military leaders in the region, particularly those who have also broken ties with France. His expressions of solidarity with Mali's Assimi Goïta and Niger's General Abdourahmane Tiani have contributed to the formation of what some call an anti-French axis in the Sahel. In September 2023, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger announced the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, a mutual defense pact explicitly positioned as an alternative to Western-backed security arrangements. This alliance represents a significant challenge to France's regional strategy, which has relied on cooperation with civilian governments and regional organizations like ECOWAS. Macron has consistently condemned military coups in the region, calling them threats to democratic progress and stability. His administration has supported ECOWAS sanctions against military regimes and called for swift returns to constitutional order. This position has been interpreted by Traore and his allies as evidence of France's desire to control African politics, rather than respect African solutions. The ideological divide is stark. Macron presents himself as a defender of democratic values and constitutional processes, while Traore portrays military rule as a necessary response to security threats and foreign interference. This fundamental disagreement about governance legitimacy makes reconciliation difficult. Number 7. Narrative of neo-colonialism. The accusation of neo-colonialism has become a central theme in Traoré's rhetoric about France. In speeches and interviews, he frequently characterizes French policies as attempts to maintain economic and political control over Burkina Faso despite formal independence. This narrative frames France not as a partner, but as an exploiter seeking to extract resources and maintain influence. Traoré has pointed to specific mechanisms of perceived French control, including the CFA franc currency system, French corporate dominance in key economic sectors, and military agreements that he claims limit Burkina Faso's sovereignty. By attacking these structures, he positions himself as a liberator fighting against continued colonial domination. For Macron, these accusations are both unfair and ahistorical. He has attempted to acknowledge colonial wrongs while arguing that contemporary France seeks partnership rather than domination. In a 2021 speech in Rwanda, Macron recognized France's overwhelming responsibility in the 1994 genocide, signaling his willingness to confront difficult historical truths. However, Macron's efforts at reconciliation have been undermined by actions perceived as paternalistic or self-interested. His initial response to the 2022 coup in Burkina Faso, which included warnings about Russian influence, was interpreted locally as evidence of France's desire to control Burkina Faso's foreign policy. Similarly, French economic interests in Burkina Faso's mining sector have fueled suspicions about France's true motivations. Number 8. Macron's vision of France-Afrique 2.0. Since taking office in 2017, Macron has attempted to redefine France's relationship with Africa, promising to break with the controversial France-Afrique system that maintained French influence through personal relationships with African leaders, often at the expense of democratic governance. His vision included more transparent partnerships, increased development aid, and support for civil society rather than just government elites. This reform agenda, however, has been viewed skeptically by Traoré and many other African leaders. They see Macron's new approach as largely rhetorical, masking continued French determination to maintain economic and political influence. Traoré has explicitly rejected what he calls France-Afrique 2.0, suggesting that the fundamental power dynamics remain unchanged despite new language. The gap between Macron's stated intentions and Traoré's perceptions reflects deeper historical distrust. Decades of French support for authoritarian leaders like Blaise Compaoré, who ruled Burkina Faso for 27 years before being ousted in a popular uprising, have created lasting suspicion about France's commitment to democracy and human rights. Macron's frustration stems from his belief that his administration has made genuine efforts to reform France's approach to Africa. He has supported the return of cultural artifacts taken during the colonial era, acknowledged historical wrongs, and increased development aid. Yet, these gestures have failed to overcome the legacy of distrust built over generations. Number 9. Media, warfare, and propaganda. The information space has become a key battleground in the conflict between Macron and Traoré. In December 2022, Burkina Faso suspended Radio France Internationale, RFI, broadcasts and blocked access to France 24's website, accusing these French media outlets of spreading false information about the security situation and giving voice to terrorist groups. For Macron, these media restrictions represent an assault on press freedom and an attempt to control the narrative about Burkina Faso's deteriorating security situation. French officials have argued that independent media coverage is essential for understanding complex conflicts and holding governments accountable. Traoré's government, however, views French media as instruments of French foreign policy rather than independent journalistic enterprises. Government spokespeople have accused RFI and France 24 of deliberately undermining Burkina Faso's military efforts by reporting on civilian casualties and human rights abuses allegedly committed by security forces. This media conflict extends beyond traditional outlets to social media, where both French and Burkinabe government-affiliated accounts engage in information warfare. Pro-Traoré social media campaigns highlight French colonial abuses and alleged contemporary interference, while French-aligned accounts emphasize the risks of Russian influence and the deteriorating security situation under military rule. Number 10. Nationalization of security. Traoré has made national sovereignty and security matters a cornerstone of his leadership. He has repeatedly stated that Burkina Faso must take full responsibility for its own security rather than relying on foreign forces. This position directly challenges the French security model for the Sahel, which emphasized multinational cooperation and French military expertise. The nationalization of security has included several concrete steps: recruiting thousands of civilian volunteers, VDPs, to fight alongside the military, increasing the defense budget despite economic challenges, and seeking alternative weapons suppliers to reduce dependence on Western equipment. Traoré has also emphasized the need for Burkinabe solutions to the complex social and economic factors driving extremism. For Macron, this nationalist approach appears dangerously simplistic given the transnational nature of terrorist groups operating across the Sahel. French security doctrine has emphasized that no single country can effectively combat groups that move freely across borders and draw support from global jihadist networks. French officials have warned that without international cooperation, Burkina Faso risks becoming overwhelmed by well-armed and experienced terrorist organizations. The disagreement about security approaches reflects different understandings of the conflict itself. France tends to view the Sahel crisis through a counter-terrorism lens, focusing on degrading jihadist groups' capabilities. Traoré increasingly frames it as a struggle for national sovereignty against both terrorists and foreign interference, a narrative that resonates with many citizens frustrated by years of deteriorating security despite international involvement. Number 11. Regional domino effect. France's concern about a regional domino effect has proven well-founded as anti-French sentiment has spread across the Sahel. Following Mali's break with France in 2022, Burkina Faso's pivot under Traoré, and Niger's coup in July 2023, France has lost military presence and political influence in 3 key Sahel countries within just 18 months. This rapid erosion of France's position represents Macron's most significant foreign policy setback. The Sahel had been central to France's global security posture and its claim to international leadership in counter-terrorism. The loss of multiple operational bases has forced a fundamental reconsideration of French military strategy in Africa. For Traoré, being part of this regional shift away from French influence enhances his domestic legitimacy and provides potential security partners. The alliance of Sahel states offers an alternative security framework that explicitly excludes France and emphasizes African solutions. This regional solidarity also provides some protection against international pressure, as Western powers must now confront a bloc rather than isolated regimes. The domino effect extends beyond security relationships to economic and diplomatic ties. French companies face increasing scrutiny and hostility across the region, while Russian and Chinese influence grows. This shift threatens decades of French investment and challenges France's self-image as an indispensable partner for its former colonies. Number 12. Wagner Group's shadow. Though Traoré has never officially confirmed Wagner Group's presence in Burkina Faso, evidence suggests growing cooperation with the Russian mercenary organization. Satellite imagery has identified Russian equipment at military bases, and Russian military advisors have been spotted in Ouagadougou. This relationship, even if unofficial, represents a direct challenge to French security interests. For Macron, Wagner's expanding footprint in Africa is deeply concerning. French intelligence reports characterize Wagner as a predatory force that extracts natural resources in exchange for security services of questionable effectiveness. French officials have documented human rights abuses by Wagner personnel in Mali and the Central African Republic, including massacres of civilians and extrajudicial killings. Traoré appears to view Wagner differently, as a pragmatic security partner without the political conditions attached to Western assistance. In public statements, he has praised Russia's respect for African sovereignty without directly addressing Wagner specifically. This ambiguity allows him to benefit from Russian support while maintaining plausible deniability about formal ties to Wagner. The Wagner issue exemplifies the broader geopolitical dimensions of the Macron-Traoré tension. What began as a bilateral disagreement has evolved into part of the global competition between Western democracies and Russia. For both leaders, the stakes extend beyond their bilateral relationship to their respective positions in this larger struggle for influence. Number 13. Threat to economic interests. France maintains significant economic interests in Burkina Faso, particularly in the mining, telecommunications, and banking sectors. French companies like Total, Orange, and Société Générale have operated in the country for decades. Under Traoré, these interests have faced increasing pressure through regulatory changes, contract reviews, and public criticism. For Macron, protecting French economic interests is both a practical concern and a matter of principle. French investments provide jobs, tax revenue, and infrastructure development that benefit Burkina Faso's economy. French officials argue that driving away established investors risks economic instability at a time when Burkina Faso faces severe fiscal challenges due to the security crisis. Traoré has framed economic sovereignty as essential to true independence. His government has initiated reviews of mining contracts, particularly in the gold sector where French companies have significant operations. Public statements have emphasized the need for fair economic partnerships that provide greater benefits to Burkina Faso rather than foreign shareholders. This economic dimension of the conflict has practical consequences for both countries. French companies face uncertainty and potential losses, while Burkina Faso risks deterring future investment at a time when its economy is already struggling with the combined effects of security challenges, climate change, and global economic pressures. Number 14. Alienation from ECOWAS and France. Burkina Faso's relationship with the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has deteriorated under Traoré's leadership, paralleling its break with France. After ECOWAS imposed sanctions following the September 2022 coup, Traoré adopted an increasingly confrontational stance toward the regional organization, which he portrayed as a tool of French influence rather than an authentic African institution. This alienation culminated in January 2024 when Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger announced their withdrawal from ECOWAS, creating an unprecedented split in the regional body. For Macron, who had supported ECOWAS as a framework for regional cooperation and democratic governance, this withdrawal represented another blow to France's regional strategy. Traoré has justified the break with ECOWAS by claiming that the organization has abandoned its founding principles and become an instrument of foreign powers. This narrative resonates with his broader critique of international institutions as mechanisms of Western control rather than genuine multilateralism. The ECOWAS split has practical implications beyond symbolism. It complicates regional approaches to shared challenges like terrorism, climate change, and migration. For ordinary citizens, it threatens freedom of movement and economic opportunities that had been guaranteed under ECOWAS protocols. Number 15. Symbolic rejection of France's legacy. Perhaps the most emotionally charged aspect of the Macron-Traoré tension is the systematic rejection of French cultural and historical influence in Burkina Faso. Under Traoré, symbolic actions included removing French street names, promoting local languages over French in official contexts, and questioning the continued use of the CFA franc currency. These symbolic rejections strike at the heart of France's self-image as a cultural and intellectual leader with a civilizing mission. For many French officials, including Macron, France's cultural legacy in Africa represents a positive aspect of the colonial relationship that should be preserved even as political relationships evolve. Traoré has embraced a different historical narrative, one that emphasizes resistance to colonialism rather than assimilation of French values. He frequently invokes Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, who challenged French influence before his assassination in 1987. By aligning himself with Sankara's legacy, Traoré positions his anti-French stance as a continuation of historical resistance rather than a new development. The battle over historical memory and cultural influence reflects deeper questions about identity and sovereignty. For Traoré and many of his supporters, true independence requires psychological and cultural decolonization, not just political autonomy. For Macron, the rejection of shared cultural heritage represents an unnecessary rupture that ignores positive aspects of the Franco-Burkinabe relationship.